Scott Gleeson does a great job, by the way. Great follow on Twitter. Does a great job covering college basketball from all angles from USA Today. Follow him on Twitter at Scott M. Gleeson. Joins us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Scott, good to talk again, my friend. You all ready?
Hey, it's the madness, man.
It is.
Thanks for having me back.
I'll tell you this. We appreciate you coming back on. I remember I told the story last week. As a kid, I always found a way. My father would always give me a free pass. It was the first 2 days of the tournament, Thursday and Friday. So I would just fake some type of temperature, some type of sickness. Oh, by the way, I missed the bus. I can't catch the ride. These are the Thursday and Friday to me are the two best days of the tournament because I always think there's potential for those just wild buzzer beaters and those upsets. I mean, it's not we haven't seen it a lot over the last several years, but I harken back 10, 15 years ago. Two best days I think are Thursday and Friday.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it feels like, Christmas Eve right now, just, getting ready to go open presents. So, I mean, what's fascinating, now in this day and age is that, with all the digital devices, you can kind of catch the games a little bit in the middle of work or in the middle of school, So it's a much different feel than probably when you and I were growing up of, having to kind of fake being sick. But listen, I think there's going to be some Cinderellas this year. I think the field is much more open than, like you mentioned, it's been in years past. And, I'm in the process of right now writing some stories about Cinderellas and, just kind of playing at the idea of could a 16 never beat a 1 seed. And I think it's exciting just to think about, with some of these scenarios.
Did you, when the bracket was revealed, did you have any issues with any of the teams that got in last, as they say, the last four in, so to speak, or any of the bubble teams? Are you okay with how everything somewhat laid out? I know some teams really didn't look like they were treated. Some looked like they were treated in higher seeds and vice versa.
I mean, listen, I think Syracuse, that's just ludicrous that they were in the field. I mean,
I agree.
I don't think they should have been in. That being said, I think that they are a tough out in this tournament because if you're playing against a team like Syracuse and you only have a few days to kind of get ready to simulate their zone and practices, it's just a really tough thing. I mean, ACC teams are kind of used to going against that. So it's a really tough out, I think, and that's what we saw, in 2016 when Q's went to the Final Four. So just because a team, maybe didn't deserve to get in, I don't know that Creighton deserved to get in. I think these are still teams that can do well in the tournament, and you just got to get there. So, some of the teams that I guess I thought got really snubbed, I would have liked to see Notre Dame play because I feel like, they're a much different team now that they got Fonzie Colson back. And USC, to me, there's nothing about their profile that, says NIT. That's an NCAA tournament team right there. And then I just think mid-majors are kind of screwed in this situation, like St. Mary's, maybe not so much, but Middle Tennessee to me, I think, you play on the road so much and they did their best to kind of bulk up their schedule. I think those games in Dayton, man, they should kind of save some of those for mid-majors. Don't just throw these, bottom of the barrel power league teams in there. Get some mid-majors in there because those are the Cinderellas we love to see.
How about in the East region? Well, I'll give you two regions. The East region, where you look at Alabama, I think that's an overrated seed at 9. And then you look in the West bracket with Ohio State. I mean, if you look at what they dub, you guys say the Q1 teams, 8-6 on the road this year, 3-5 against them. You lose 3 out of 5 to end the season. That's not really it's not a positive when the committee looks at you. And then you turn around, they lost 3 times to Penn State. So they're watching the tournament at home. I mean, how about those two teams I just brought up?
Well, I mean, let's start with Alabama. I think the thing that you got to point out here, because we're looking at that 8-9 line, you'd have to play the 1 seed Villanova if you do win. They have Colin Sexton on their team, and I think that is he's one of the best players in this tournament. And listen, you can talk as much as you want about team ball. You can say, oh, this team has veterans. They have great chemistry. If you have a guy with takeover abilities who can really kind of put a team on their back, it gives you a chance to win in the tournament. And so I really feel like Villanova's had an amazing season, but I will be really threatened and scared because I think Colin Sexton, if they can get to the they got to get past Virginia Tech first.
Right.
I think they can challenge them because this is a guy who, I mean, we're talking in that, I forget, it was a November or December game. It was 3-on-5 because Alabama had all these guys foul out or had the ejections. and he was literally scoring 3-on-5. I mean, he had 40 points in that game.
That's a great point.
And he's just on a tear here in the last series in March in the SEC tournament. He looked fantastic. So Alabama's a scary team to me. I think they could maybe even beat Villanova.
And you pair him up too with John Petty, so you got some star power there. And you're right, Sexton, he's a McDonald's All-American, and you also take, I guess, the quality of play too in the SEC. How about Texas Tech? You look. I look at teams that are pretty well balanced as well, and I also look at the guard play. Evans Arich is about 18 a game. You think with the 3 seed, are they a sleeper team?
It's interesting because I thought that West Virginia and Texas Tech should have switched seeds. Where West Virginia I thought had a better overall profile to be like in that 4-3 seed range, and so Texas Tech I think probably got a little bit of a better seed than maybe they deserved. So it's interesting because before they got that 3 seed, we wrote a story on Selection Sunday that this is a team that's sort of a sleeper. You should keep an eye on them. But now it's kind of hard to say like, oh, number 3 is a sleeper, they get to the Final Four. But I think when you're looking at how the Big 12 played out this year, I just think that Texas Tech is one of those teams that can really kind of do some things in the NCAA tournament. They've got a tough, first-round matchup against a Stephen F. Austin team that can really, score on offense.
Yep.
So
yeah.
You got to get past them first. But everyone's talking about how Villanova's got this easy track to the Final Four in the East. I see that, but I think there are a lot of dangerous teams there. Florida's good, Wichita State's good, and I think Texas Tech is a real threat here.
See, Florida to me is just too inconsistent for my liking. I don't.
Right.
And I know, you watch this is what you get paid to do. I've watched them enough this year where I'm just not completely sold on them, so to speak. And you mentioned Villanova. I guess if it turned around, they would have. In that East region, how about you mentioned Wichita State, which always figures out a way to either get to the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight.
Yeah.
Last night we watched St. Bonnie's over UCLA, and that's why to go back. I don't think it's. I don't know. I watched a ton of St. Bonnie's this year too. I love that story. I love their fan base. I don't think it's a major upset to speak, but I think if anything, listen, they have a chance of beating Florida.
Oh yeah. That's the thing is that this is a team that's won like 20 of 21 games, and Rhode Island is a really scary team from the A-10, but St. Bonaventure, I think they can beat Florida. That's just a really tough matchup. It's interesting because Florida, why I think they're inconsistent, to your point, is that, they play with 4 guards. It's basically a 4-guard offense. So that's going to help you in some games, and it's going to cause you trouble in others. And I think that going against a really, really good St. Bonaventure team, I think that could really be an upset there. And then, St. Bonaventure, speaking of seeding, they should have been like an 8 or a 9 seed. Having them be an 11 seed was just bizarre and crazy. That might have been the worst, seating line by the committee. So other teams are going to pay the price for that.
Every year we will typically see a guy that just burst on the scene if you haven't watched him. I would joke with a couple of my buddies the other day when we always talk about Harold Arsenault, the show back in the day. We've seen guys that had these runs, and we've even seen these freshmen that have had these unbelievable runs. For those that maybe don't watch a ton of Missouri, and you got Michael Porter Jr., listen, we know he's a little rusty coming back from that back injury. But again, you look at him, he is that potential number one. Is he a player that can basically put this team on their back and make a deep run?
So it's interesting because I feel like Missouri is probably the most intriguing team in this tournament just because everyone sort of wants to see what Porter can do. I don't think he's there yet as far as being a guy that can really kind of strap the team on his back and really carry them. But the thing that people got to realize is that the reason Missouri is an NCAA tournament team, the reason they have an 8 seed, is because of the guys who stepped up when Porter wasn't there. So to me, the question is more of, can Porter kind of fit into the mix, and can the chemistry get right just in time for them to make a deep run at the team? Because I think, he's a great asset and he's a great fit for that team to really kind of do some things. But we're going to see a lot of other guys, role players, glue players, do some things on that team that can really kind of let Porter come in and do his thing without having to, have too much of a strenuous, I got to carry the team to the Final Four type of thing. So they're dangerous if they can get it right, if they can kind of click at the right time. That's hard to do because he's just coming back, but he's such a multidimensional player that, you kind of think it can happen.
Getting a couple minutes with Scott Gleeson, great follow on Twitter. Scott M. Gleeson does a great job covering college hoops, a writer for USA Today, joining us on the Boardwalk Hunt Hotline. Rich Quinones here. Let me give you one team that I'm curious about that I think can make some noise if they really start to get a little momentum going around. How about Providence?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, it's hard to say, oh, yeah, that team looked really, you can take a lot from a loss. The way that they looked against Villanova, they looked impressive, and then they beat Xavier.
That's being nice.
Before that in overtime. I mean, you're talking about two number one seeds in this tournament, right? And they went toe to toe with both teams. So tournaments all about matchups. You know, I get that, but Providence is hot. So Texas A&M is not necessarily hot. I think in that 7-10 line, Providence can probably get past them. And then if you're North Carolina, defending national champs, a lot of people are circling you in to go to San Antonio. You're getting a really tough round of 32 matchup if Providence gets there because, again, just the way that they played against Villanova, the way that they played against Xavier, this is a team that, plays with a chip on their shoulder. And we see this so many times, like in years past, where a bubble team just kind of finds a way to kind of get that sense of urgency. And then once they're in the tournament, they're just ready to knock off some of these power teams.
Yeah, and that's a great point, too, because we always have the argument, well, they should have never got in, and then all of a sudden they'll get to that Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight, and then there's silence across the board. I look at some of these. I'm a big fan of the 15-2 because there's always an upset brewing. Now, I'm not going to sit here and turn around and say, well, you know what, maybe Davidson's 12-5, I should say, knocking off Kentucky. I don't think Duke is going to lose. But to me, there's always that 12-5 game, that 15-2. When you really looked at your bracket, have you seen one of those games where you say, man, I would not want to play this 12 seed? I certainly think this 2 seed might be on upset alert.
Yeah, I mean, so when we're talking about the 12 seeds, I think all of these 5-12 lines are scary. I mean, Kentucky, I think, is peaking at the right time, and we've always kind of seen Calipari teams evolve, but they're meeting a Davidson team that really is hot right now, winning the A-10 tournament. So I think that's, there's a 12 seed right there. The other 12 seed I think is, very in touch for an upset here would be South Dakota State. They've got a player by the name of Mike Dahm who scored 50 points in a game last year and averages about, 23 and 10. So South Dakota State here, having them be at the 12 line, I think Ohio State's got to be really scared in that situation.
Have you revealed your Final Four? I'm just curious.
Yeah, but here's the thing: is I had Virginia in there. This is before the injury to the sixth man of the year in the ACC. So
I have to revise it.
Getting a little bit of anxiety about that pick now. I feel very confident with it. I know a lot of people aren't picking Michigan State, and I think that's a pretty smart pick. But that Midwest region to me is so. Oh, it's hard to predict. It's really hard to predict.
I look at Murray State, West Virginia. West Virginia always plays with their defense. They got the big boys that can rebound, three-point shooters as well. I mean, do you think they have a deep run in them?
I think Murray State's a dangerous team, being at the 12 line. And it's so hard to play against West Virginia, I think, especially for teams that haven't, kind of seen that type of, press Virginia, just intensity. But Jonathan Stark is a guy in Murray State that just stands out to me. He's this lightning quick guard. He averages like 21 points a game. If you can have a guy like that, similar to how we talked about Colin Sexton with Alabama, really just kind of, put up a 30-point game and just, really put the team on his back. I think there's a shot here because what we saw with West Virginia in the regular season and the Big 12 season is that sometimes they can fall into offensive stalls, right? As great as their defense is, if you're not scoring in the half-court offense, I mean, you can lose to some of these mid-major teams. That's why these power conference teams don't schedule mid-majors in the non-conference season, some of the good ones, because they know there's nothing for them to win there. They could easily lose. And that's why it's so exciting. I think Murray State's one of those teams that's pretty dangerous.
2 more before I let you get out of here. I'm looking at, again, with the 12-5, and for some reason, my gut just tells me New Mexico State's going to pull off an upset here against Clemson.
I mean, it's a good gut check because Clemson is they're not going in the right direction. I mean, they're not streaking in the right direction. This is a team that, I mean, realistically was looking at a 3 or 4 seed for a while just based on how well they were playing in the ACC. But it just goes to say, I think both Ohio State and Clemson, to me, these 5 seeds, they're an example of teams that have had phenomenal seasons, just awesome seasons, but that doesn't necessarily translate to a great tournament. And I think that they are two of the most vulnerable teams in this whole tournament. And New Mexico State, on the 12 line, that's where you want to be as a mid-major, because you're meeting that 5 seed that you can really kind of you can go toe-to-toe with.
Yeah, excellent point. All right, before I let you get here, who's going to be cutting down the nets? How do you see the Final Four?
I'm still sticking with Virginia right now. I mean,
really?
I really feel like I'm so impressed with their defense this year, and their offense gives me a little bit of apprehension in making that pick, because I don't think it's always top-notch, but I haven't seen a defense this good in probably the last decade.
They've got stretches too, Scott, offensively. They've got stretches where sometimes they just cannot find the basket. They have droughts. But you're right, but the defense picks them up.
Yeah, and it's like I think it's one of those things, too, where it's like they really just play well together as a team. I mean, I think some of these other teams, why it's scary for Virginia is because you have a lot of NBA caliber talent on the south side of the bracket with Kentucky, with Arizona. But Virginia, to me, I think just the way that they play together, and that defense is so tough for any of these teams. So I like Michigan getting the Final Four as well. My sleeper Final Four pick is going to be Wichita State from the East. And then I really like Michigan State coming out of the Midwest.
Yeah, you mentioned them last week. Yep.
As much as I think Duke is good, and then it's kind of a toss-up though, because I like Kansas. I think that they're good enough to break down that Final Four wall that they've had the last 2 years. So it's a toss-up between Kansas and Michigan State coming out of the Midwest. But yeah, I think Virginia is going to come down the nets.
All right, listen, I'm going to hold you to it. So have fun playing hooky tomorrow from school. You'll be glued, you'll be busy, and then we'll talk next week. Great insight. I appreciate a couple moments today, bud.
All right, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You got it, Scott Gleeson. Really good stuff.